Hey guys, we're ready to start Chapter 5, How Ecosystem Works, and Section 1 is called Energy Flow in Ecosystems, but what it actually is something that most of you guys already know, food webs and food chains. So we're going to review that information and learn a little bit more about it. So all life depends on the sun, okay? So we know that, you've heard that. So the energy from the sun gets into an ecosystem when plants use sunlight to make sugar molecules. And those sugar molecules are called glucose. This is what we're talking about, photosynthesis. Most of you guys remember photosynthesis. It's where the plants take the energy from the sun and they turn it into a sugar. So energy from the sun, okay? You can't touch it. You can feel the heat, but you can't get your hands on sunlight. Because remember, it's an abiotic factor. It's a non-living factor. Sunlight, you can't touch it. You can't feel it. You can't hold it. Plants can. Plants can. They take it and turn that sunlight energy into glucose, which is an actual thing. All right. So that's pretty interesting that they take an abiotic factor, a non-living thing, and turn it into something living and real that you can put your hands on and you can eat. Okay, it's a sugar molecule called glucose, and this is what they're doing when they're doing photosynthesis. So the details about photosynthesis, okay, it's the process that plants use, plants and algae and some bacteria. So it's not just plants. Okay, it's plants and algae and some bacteria are going to use that sunlight. Add the carbon dioxide that we're breathing out all the time, the plants take it in. So they take in the carbon dioxide and they take in water from their roots to make carbohydrates and oxygen. Miss Kales, you just said they made sugar. Then you said they made glucose. And now you're saying they make carbohydrates. What's going on? Well, all of those are three words for the same thing. So wrap your head around that. There's three words for the thing that they make. Okay, they make a sugar that's called glucose, and all sugars are carbohydrates. You guys have heard of carbs, like when you're doing exercising or dieting or whatever, you've heard of carbs. Okay, carbs are sugars. Okay, well, carbs are also starches. All right, so carbs are a big category, and in carbs you have starches and you have sugars. Okay, so carbs is a big category. Within carbs, you have starches like potatoes and sugars like fruit. Okay, so when I say they make carbohydrates, they do. When I say they make sugar, they do. When I say they make glucose, they do. I'm getting from a big category down to a smaller category. So the big category is carbohydrate. Then the next category down is sugars. There's about 40 different kinds of sugar. The one you put in your tea and your Kool-Aid, that's only one kind of sugar called sucrose. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of sugars. The sugar that the plant make is called glucose. Okay, do you see how I can say all three things and I'm still telling the truth? Carbohydrate is the big category. They make carbohydrates. Okay, they make a special sugar called glucose. And when they're doing that, they also make oxygen. That's why plants breathe out oxygen. We know they do that. That's why we love to have plants around, right? So I'm going to go over the details of this just a little bit more, the details of how photosynthesis works. Because if you haven't had biology yet, there is a whole chapter just on photosynthesis, because it's really deep and detailed, okay, about how it works. All right, so I'm going to give you some of that to give you kind of a background to help you get ready for your biology class. But the end results of photosynthesis, after they've done photosynthesis, they've got this carbohydrate, which is a sugar called glucose, and then you also get that will give you the energy to do your daily activities. We're going to talk about that in a second. How do you get your energy from the glucose? I'll show you how to do that in a second. Now this is its chemical formula. Okay, 6 carbon dioxides, that's the stuff we breathe out and the plants take it in, plus 6 water molecules. Okay, they pull that up from the roots, plus the solar energy they get from the sun. Then they take that and they turn that into the glucose. That's the formula for glucose. And they let off oxygen as a byproduct. Almost like a plant fart. It's just they're done with it. They don't need the oxygen, so they just let it out like a fart. But we're so glad that they do. That oxygen is what we breathe in. Okay? Now, looking at this formula, this is a formula you're going to have to memorize. Okay, you're going to have to memorize that it takes 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters with the solar energy, and you're going to make glucose, C6H12O6. Just get ready to memorize it. You have to memorize the formula for glucose, C6H12O6, C6H12O6, and they're going to make 6 oxygens as a byproduct. All right, guys, so I'm going to get rid of my head for just a second so we can see this formula. It's going to go some details of how this works. All right, so you have the 6 carbon dioxide right here, 6 of them. All right, and then you're going to have 6 waters. I guess I should do that in yellow maybe. 6 waters. I still can't see it because I didn't actually click it. There it is. 6 waters. All right, add to the sunlight. And in the plants, what is that special stuff in the plants called? It's called chlorophyll. Okay, it doesn't work. This only works if you have chlorophyll, because we can't stand in an empty field and all of a sudden we're not hungry, can we? Just stand there and let the sun hit us and all of a sudden we're not hungry anymore? Doesn't work for us because we don't have chlorophyll. Okay, chlorophyll is the magic that makes this happen. So plants have chlorophyll. That's the only way that this will work. And then once they're doing their photosynthesis, they're going to make the sugar. They actually only make 1 glucose at a time. 1 glucose molecule. When they're doing this, it takes 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters plus the sunlight and chlorophyll to make 1 sugar. And when they do that, they're going to make 6 oxygens and send them off. Okay. Okay, what I have on this slide is a picture that I'd drawn to help go over the details of how photosynthesis actually works when it's working. All right, so let me see what color. Use my red pen, I guess. So we know with the formula we just talked about a second ago, you're going to have 6 carbon dioxides, all right, and you're going to have 6 waters. All right, so let's look at the actual atoms and elements that we used. Okay, so 6 carbons, and they're right here. This is our glucose that we made, right? Here's the 6 carbons right here. And then with 12 hydrogens, they're right here. Do you see the 6H2? That's 12 hydrogens, and they're right here. But look, glucose only needs 6 oxygens. All right, we're right here because we have 6 CO2. There's 12 of them right here. We've already got extras. But then you've got 6 oxygens here. So we have a total of 18 oxygens, and we only need 6 of them. So what they do is they throw them off at the end. So if we have 18 oxygens and we only need 6, that means we're going to have 12 left over. And here they are. Okay, so that's how the formula works. You're going to need to memorize the formula. 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 waters plus the solar energy in the presence of chlorophyll. Remember, because we can't do this. You can't just stand in an empty field and all of a sudden you're not hungry. Okay, you have to have chlorophyll. So back to the beginning, these are the ingredients of the recipe. Okay, the ingredients of the recipe are called the products, the reactants. So we have 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters, plus our solar energy. Those are our reactants, the ingredients, is going to give us 1 glucose molecule and 6 O2s. As a result, those are our products. So that's how the formula is set up. You're going to have to memorize the formula. All right, now photosynthesis makes just 1 glucose molecule. Okay. Now, what the plants do is they use this glucose for their fuel. They use it to make leaves. They use it to make flowers. They use it to grow. They actually use it. They didn't make it just for us. Now we use it. We're going to take the carrots or the potatoes or the lettuce and we're going to eat that, okay? Or we're going to eat the cow that ate those things, okay? But so we're taking the glucose from the plant, but they didn't make it just for us. They're using it themselves. And so they make this glucose molecule 1 molecule at a time, all right? But it's sort of like a penny, all right? When you're making glucose, you make like 1 penny at a time. But do you want to walk around carrying 900 pennies? You got $9. Do you want 900 pennies? No. You're going to save those pennies or collect those pennies into dollar bills. All right. And so the plant does sort of the same thing. The glucose is a tiny little molecule. So what they do is they make a whole bunch of glucose and store it. See the potato down here? They store it as a starch. So what the potato is like a whole bunch of pennies. Imagine how many pennies you'd have in a $20 bill. That's a lot of pennies. Okay, so a potato is sort of like that. It is a whole bunch of energy, all stored together in an easy, compact place. So that's what we call a starch. And both of them are types of carbohydrates. Do you see how we can get those three words to work together now? Both the starch and the sugars are types of carbohydrates. The little sugars, they're called simple sugars. They're like pennies or nickels. The starches are like $20 bills, or worse, $50 bills or $100 bills, because there are a whole bunch of little ones stacked together. All right, so that's what the plant does too. The plant didn't make these potatoes for us. Didn't make the potatoes for the farmer. They made them for themselves so that they can survive through the winter and come back the next year. Okay, that's why they store their extra sugars in these starches. Okay, so when plants are making glucose, we call them, because they can make their own food, we call them producers. Okay, they're called producers. And it's like, well, wait, Miss Gales, I can make a sandwich. I can make soup. Sometimes they even make fancy stuff. I can make my own food. That doesn't make you a producer. Okay, producers mean, okay, because you know that you can't just stand in an empty field, let the sun hit you, and all of a sudden you're not hungry anymore. Okay, you can't do that. You can't make your food. Okay, plants can. Okay, plants are making inorganic molecules, or making organic molecules out of inorganic molecules. And we said earlier when I first got started that it was really, really amazing. They can take sunlight, which is something you can't really touch, and turn it into something real. They're turning inorganic molecules into organic molecules. That's why it's really interesting what they can do. And so because they can do this, we call them producers. They are producing their own food. But there's two other words for producers. Okay, there's autotrophs or self-feeders. Now autotroph, again, these are other words for producers. Autotroph, auto means self. You've heard of autobiographies, right? That means written by yourself. You wrote your own book. Okay, auto means self. Troph, it comes from the word for trough. Have you seen, like on farms, the big tubs where they put the food or the water for the animals, and they call that a trough, where they're feeding the pigs or the cows or something? That's a trough. It means to feed. Autotroph, self-feeder. Plants make their own food. Okay, so that's where we get the words for producer, autotroph. Okay, because you're going to, sometimes I'll call them autotrophs and sometimes I'll call them producers, and I'm talking about plants or anything that can do photosynthesis. So plants are called producers. Okay, we can't make our own food. We have to eat something. So we are called consumers. The word consume means to eat or to take. All right, so we are called consumers. Okay, so are cows, pigs, horses, anything that has to eat is called a consumer. All right, so a consumer is an organism that eats other organisms or organic matter instead of producing its own nutrients or obtaining nutrients from inorganic sources. What this means is we don't do photosynthesis. Okay, it's a long word to say we don't do photosynthesis. We have to eat something else. Okay, now just like producer had its other name called autotroph, consumer has a second name called heterotroph. Hetero means outside or other than. Hetero means outside or other than, and trophs means to feed, just like it did a minute ago. So a lot of big science words work that way. If you know the suffix and prefixes, you can mix them together, okay, to make new words. Autotroph, heterotroph. Auto means self. Troph means to feed. Hetero means other than to feed. So you have to eat something from the outside. You can't make your own. Now, when a rabbit eats a clover plant, okay, that rabbit's going to get the energy from the carbohydrates. Remember I said the small little glucose molecules were like pennies, and they stored them in the bigger carbohydrates and starches, right? So when the clover plant makes little glucose molecules, he stores the extras in his leaves and his stems as carbohydrates. So the rabbit's going to get the energy from the carbohydrates in the clover that the clover made doing photosynthesis. And then when the coyote eats the rabbit, some of that energy gets transferred up from the rabbit to the coyote. Okay, that's why we call them food chains. Okay, the energy gets transferred up. So in the example shown above, the clover is the producer and the rabbit and coyote are consumers. Okay, what is the other word? The clover is an autotroph and the rabbit and coyote are heterotrophs. Okay, let's see what we got here. Okay, so the producers, the plants, the autotrophs, producers, plants, autotroph, they're going to get their energy directly straight up from the sunlight. They get their energy from the sun. You know, everything needs energy to live, right? Plants get it straight up from the sun. The consumers get it indirectly because they've eaten the plant. So plants get it directly from the sun and consumers get it indirectly. Now, I said that the sun is the beginning of almost all food chains, okay? But it is almost all, not all. Okay, these deep, deep ocean communities, like way down in the bottom of the ocean, there's worms and clams and crabs and mussels and barnacles that live in total darkness, never once seen the sunlight, ever, never seen the sun. Well, how can you do photosynthesis? You have to have something to start the food chain. Right? You got to have something. The food chains are supposed to start with a plant, right? You got the sunlight and the plant, and that starts a food chain. There's no sun and there's no plants. How do you start a food chain? Well, there's no photosynthesis going on down here. It's way too dark. What happens is there's little bacteria, and the bacteria, the bottom of the ocean is crazy, crazy cold, way too cold, except near like underground volcanoes or what they call hydrothermal vents, like cracks in the bottom of the ocean where heat from the inside of the earth can get up and warm the water, sometimes crazy hot. Okay, but when those volcanic vents in the bottom of the ocean are there, they're also spewing chemicals in the water. There are these little bacteria that can use the hydrogen sulfide and some other chemicals. They use that to make their sugars. And once the bacteria can use the hydrogen sulfide to make their sugar, then something can eat that, and something can eat that, something can eat that. So there's whole food chains in the bottom of the ocean that never once see the sun, because those little bacteria can take the inorganic molecules, right? Hydrogen sulfide is not a living thing. It's just a chemical. Just a chemical. But those bacteria can take that chemical and turn it into a sugar. And then they can start the food chains. So now, when the plants are using sunlight to make their food, we call that photosynthesis. Photo means light, right? And synthesis means to make. They're making energy from light. That's why it's called photosynthesis. There's no light down here. These bacteria are making sugar, but they're not using light, so we can't call it photosynthesis. We call it chemosynthesis. Chemo for chemical. They're using a chemical to start the food chain. All right, so down the bottom of the ocean, these bacteria are doing chemosynthesis, and that starts the food chains down there, and they never once see the sun. All right, so that's pretty interesting. It's an exception to the rule. Most of the time we say all energy comes from the sun. Well, yeah, except for these guys. So what eats what? This is a part you probably remember from middle school, right? Or some of you even remember it from elementary school. All right, what eats what? Okay, you got all of these different types of consumers. Now, we're not talking plants here. We're talking just the consumers. You got the herbivores that eat the plants. You see the word herb in there, like herbs and spices. Herbs are like oregano and basil and thyme, and those are plants, right? So herbivores eat only plants. Carnivores eat only animals. Omnivore, the word omni means everything. Okay, omnivores eat both plants and animals, and of course the decomposers are going to eat the dead stuff so it doesn't pile up and get all gross. But in the process of eating all the dead stuff, they're going to put nutrients back in the earth for the next generation. So those are our decomposers, and you probably remember most of these. Okay, so what we know so far. Producers do photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. They make their own food, and producers are called autotrophs. Consumers, like us, we have to eat our food. Consumers are called heterotrophs. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds of consumers, four basically. There could be more, but four basic types of consumers. You have the herbivores that eat only plants, carnivores that eat only animals, omnivores that can eat both, and decomposers that eat the dead stuff and return nutrients to the ground. So there's four types of consumers. All right, so when we're getting in here, there's also levels of consumers. Not only four types of consumers, but there's levels depending on what you eat. All right, so the plants, of course, down here on my list, let me get a pen to write with. The plants are down here called our producers. Okay, they start all the food pyramids and food chains. Producers. Okay, now the herbivores, the one who eats the plants, are called primary consumers. Okay, they're the first thing to eat. Primary consumer. Primary means one. So that's the herbivores. They eat the plants directly. Then the secondary consumers, okay, they eat what ate the plant. Second level consumers, secondary consumers. And then tertiary, that means three. That's the third level consumers. These are our carnivores, okay? And then you have quaternary. Do you hear the word quarter in there? Fourth level. Okay, so they eat what's ate, what ate, what ate. So if you have a pyramid, let's say we have a food chain that has a plant, and then you have a cricket, and a bird, and a cat, and what's going to eat the cat? Maybe a snake? Okay, maybe a snake eats the cat, or a hawk or something. Yeah, that'll work. That'll work. Okay, so you've got your grass. That's our producer. Okay, the cricket that eats the grass. Okay, that's the first thing to eat. He's the herbivore because he's eating a plant, but he's the primary consumer. He's the first one to eat. And then the bird that eats the cricket, that's the secondary consumer. Now the bird might be an omnivore if he eats plants. If he eats seeds, okay, so he might be an omnivore. The one who eats the plants is almost always an herbivore, but the omnivores can be down here sometimes if they're eating a plant. Okay, so that's where we get, yeah, it gets crazy when we get into food webs because then it's all, anybody can have whatever they want for lunch. So let's just stick with a chain, stick with a plain chain for right now. So you've got your plant, you've got the cricket that eats the plant. He's the first eater, so he's the primary consumer. And then the bird who eats them is the secondary consumer. The cat who eats them is tertiary consumer. And then the snake or the hawk that eats the cat is quaternary consumer. Okay, so as you go up, they have levels. Primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, quaternary consumer. You can even get to quintenary, which is 5, if you want to, depending on how much energy there's available in the food web. If there's a lot of energy available, you can get to quintenary pretty easy, but it's not as easy when food is limited. And I'm going to show you why that is in just a second. All right, so here's the levels, okay? So we have, and usually we don't put the decomposers down in here, okay? Because they can show up at any level, okay? And anything can die, even plants can die, and the decomposers are going to handle it at any level. So we don't usually put them in here. But here's our producers, and a lot of times you'll see primary producers, but that's just going to confuse you. Producers are producers are producers. You don't have a secondary producer. You can't have a secondary producer. There's only producers. Sometimes they'll list primary just to help you get it straight, but there's no need. Primary producers, that's our plants, producers. The first one to eat, okay, we got a rabbit, we got, this is so small, bugs, mice, I can't tell what that is. Those are the first things to eat. These are our herbivores. The secondary consumers, they eat them. And then tertiary, sometimes that's as much as you can get, depending on how much energy the plants are able to make. If it's a really, really productive ecosystem, we can get higher, easier. But sometimes tertiary is all we get. Okay, so again, here's our producer. They make their own food through photosynthesis, and so we call them what? Because they can make their own food, we call them autotrophs. Okay, All right, and then with our consumers, okay, they get their energy by eating others. Okay, they get their energy by eating other things. Producer, consumer. What's the other word for consumer? Heterotroph. Okay, so producers are autotrophs, consumers are heterotrophs, and these are the different types of consumers. Okay, you have herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, and decomposer, and we got examples of each one. All right, examples of all of them, and their definitions or where they get their energy from. Okay, so you'll want to know and memorize this table. It will come in very, very handy. Okay. All right, there is a cute little song about energy roles and the different parts of energy. The link should work for you. You can just, yeah, you should be able to click on it. But it also talks about, do you remember when we learned about organism and then population, and then if you have, like, we talked about Bob the Wildebeest when we did it, right? Bob the Wildebeest and all of his brothers and uncles and cousins and sisters, all the other wildebeest make up the population. All of the living things in that area with the wildebeest, the zebras, the lions, the grasses, the trees, all the living things and the bugs and fleas, all the living things makes up the community. But then if you add living and non-living things, that makes up the ecosystem. Well, that's mostly what this song is about. We're going to talk about the food chains and what eats what, but I thought this was a cute little song for you. All right, so burning the fuel. Okay, so if food is fuel, okay, and it is, okay, the food we eat fuels our body. All right, so once we've taken in the glucose that the plants made for us, or starches if we're eating with, like, remember we said glucose is single, like pennies, and starches like potatoes are like $20 bills or $50 bills, right? Depending on how much energy you get. A piece of cake might be $1,000 bill, depending on all of that energy that you get from that. So, like I said, when you take in your energy, that's the food you eat. That's your fuel. Okay, so how do we get from the food in our mouth to running around the track during gym? Okay, which you guys are at home, you don't get to run around the track, but let's say, oh, walking around your neighborhood. Yeah, that you can do. Okay. All right, so how do you get from a hamburger, the energy that's in a hamburger, to the energy that moves your muscles to walk around the neighborhood? Okay, that's what we're going to talk about next. All right, so the organism gets the energy from the food that it eats, all right, and that food has to be broken down inside the body. So we take the oxygen we breathe in and we add it to the sugar or the glucose or the starch, whatever it is we just ate, okay? We take oxygen we breathe in, add it to the sugar. We do some chemical reactions to it to get the energy. There's that ATP is what we call our energy. And when we get our energy, we're going to breathe out or release carbon dioxide and water. In the chemical reactions that cause this to happen, we breathe in our oxygen, okay, we add it to the food we eat, and we do chemical reactions on it to get the energy out of it. When we do that, we're going to breathe out carbon dioxide and water in the process. Now, I'm going to go over more details on this in just a second. All right, so hold on just a second. Oh, forgot to tell you what it's called. I said it was a chemical reaction, right? I said it was a chemical reaction. I've written all over it now. The chemical reaction we're doing is called cellular respiration. Okay, cellular respiration. That's the chemical reaction we do to break down the food we eat to get us energies to run our bodies on. All right, guys, so this chemical reaction is called cellular respiration. All right, and it happens inside your cell. That's how it got its name. But in the cell, in the mitochondria of cells. Do you remember when you learned about cells and the nucleus, which is the brain of the cells, and all the little organelles? One of those organelles is called a mitochondria, and that's where this happens. So in the mitochondria, we take the food we eat and we break it down so that we can get the energy out of it and, you know, walk around the neighborhood or sing or dance or climb a tree or just lay on the bed, whatever it is, it still takes energy. All right, so cellular respiration is a process by which the cells produce energy from carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrate is the big category of food, like sugar and starch, right? Sugar and starches are carbohydrates. That's what we use for our fuel. So the cellular respiration is us getting energy out of those carbohydrates. We take oxygen from the atmosphere. when we breathe it in. We combine it with the glucose. And then when we do we're going to make water and carbon dioxide as a end product. We're going to release energy when we do so. So the energy is what we're after. Okay, I'm going to remove this little picture right here. Look. So here's the glucose. Okay. Now when you take a big carbohydrate like potatoes or starches or something, remember I said that starches were like $20 or $50 bills and glucose are like pennies, right? The digestion of your food is where you take that $20 bill and you break it back down into pennies. You take the $20 bill of the food you eat, the big starches or the big carbohydrates, the big food you eat, you have to break it back down into glucose molecules. Once you've broken it back down into glucose molecules, then you're ready to do cellular respiration. So you start with the glucose molecule, add the oxygen you breathe in. Then you do your chemical reaction on it. You do the cellular respiration on it. You're going to breathe out carbon dioxide and water. That's what you can tell in this mask. That's why you can't breathe, right? It's full of carbon dioxide. I need some oxygen. You see what I'm saying? All right, you breathe out the carbon dioxide and water, but you're going to get the energy, okay, from the food you eat. That occurs inside the mitochondria of cells right here in most organisms. Not every organism is going to do this, okay? Not every organism is going to do cellular respiration. But that's a thing. They do another thing called fermentation or anaerobic respiration. But we'll get there. We'll get there. And if not, you'll definitely get there in biology. So in the mitochondria is where this happens. So we take our glucose from the food we ate, add to it the oxygen we just breathed in. And then we're going to do the chemical reaction on it to get the energy. All right. When we do that, we're going to breathe out carbon dioxide and water vapor. Now, we said breathe out water. You know, I'm not talking spit. I'm talking the water vapor that comes out when you breathe out. Okay. That's why you can fog a mirror. Okay. That's why you can fog up a mirror, because there's water vapor coming out with your breath. Okay. So during cellular respiration, we're going to breathe in our oxygen and use it to release the energy from food. Through that cellular respiration, we're using the glucose, that sugar, and the oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So let's look at the formula for this one. All right, you take your glucose molecule. Remember I told you you'd have to memorize it? C6H12O6. I told you you have to memorize glucose molecule. C6H12O6. We add it to 6 oxygens that we have to breathe in. It takes 6 to make it happen. So we breathe in 6 oxygen molecules. We probably breathe in like a whole bunch more than 6 at a time. But it takes 6 to make the formula work. Then we do the formula. Okay, we do the reaction. And we're going to breathe out 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters. And we're going to get our energy. And the energy, again, is called ATP. Okay? Adenosine triphosphate. But you don't have to remember that if you remember ATP. Okay? So while we're burning our fuel, okay, let's see. Part of the energy obtained through cellular respiration is used to carry out daily activities. That's what we do. That's what we need the energy for. We're carrying out our daily activities. And every time you walk or breathe or read a book or even just think, even if you're just thinking, okay, you're using energy, or especially when you play a sport. All of these things is going to take energy. And so the energy you obtain is used to make your body grow, to make more body tissues to help you fight disease so that you can grow and stay healthy. Those are all the different things that you need energy for. Now, we often, okay, very, very often in my case, we often take in more energy than we need at one time. So all of that extra energy is converted to fat so that we can use it later, actually. It's a leftover from when we were still living in the cavemen and stuff like that. You didn't get food every day. The cavemen, they don't get food every day. So when they get it, their body has to store it for the next time. You never know when you're going to get it the next time. Okay, so we store it as sugars or fat in the bloodstream. Now, The plants are doing photosynthesis too. All right. They're doing photosynthesis, but they're doing cellular respiration. Remember, I said a little while ago that the plants didn't make all that glucose for us. They didn't do it because they love us. They didn't make that big starchy potato because they love us. Remember, that starchy potato is full of energy. They didn't make all that because they love us. They made it for themselves and we just took it. So plants do cellular respiration also. Okay, plants do cellular respiration also. So every living thing has to use cellular respiration to get the energy that they need from the food molecules. So even organisms that make their own food through, like plants through photosynthesis, or those special bacteria through chemosynthesis, even they have to use the cellular respiration to get the energy that they need from the carbohydrates that they produce themselves. Okay, so we have photosynthesis happening here, where we take the sun's energy and we make glucose. And then we have cellular respiration, where we take the glucose and make energy. Did you hear energy on both sides? I'm going to write ATP right here. All right, so we start off with the sun's energy and we make glucose. I'm going to put a big G right there. We take the sun's energy and we make glucose. But then we take the glucose and make ATP. Energy, glucose, energy. So the whole thing between photosynthesis and cellular respiration is just an energy transfer process. We're taking the sun's energy and using it for body energy. We're taking the sun's energy and turning it into body energy. And that's the whole reason we do both of these reactions. It's entirely an energy transfer process. Now, the way that we do it, I don't know if there's one more click. Yes, okay. So the whole thing is to transfer energy. So every time an organism eats another, the energy is transferred. And so the transfer of energy can be traced by studying food chains and food webs and trophic levels. We just talked about the trophic levels when we talk about primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Those are the trophic levels. Do you remember I said the word troph means to feed? I'm using words, okay? We said autotroph is what we call our producers. They make their own food. Troph means to feed. Heterotrophs, those are our consumers. So trophic levels are feeding levels. So we study the paths of energy between organisms to tell us which organisms in an ecosystem depend on which other ones to survive. All right? You've done food chains and food webs. All right? The food chains are easier, right? You've done food chains and food webs. Food chains are easier. A food chain is a sequence. When you're doing them in vocabulary, they'll give you some sort of way to mean that the chain is a sequence. Or sometimes they say linear, L-I-N, I think so. I think it's I-E-R. Not positive. My spelling isn't great. That is definitely not how you spell linear. But linear means in a straight line. Sequence means in a straight line. So if you see linear or you see sequence, we're talking food chain. Okay? A food web is a more complex pattern. Okay, so if you say sequence or linear, we're talking food chain. It's a sequence in which the energy is transferred from one organism to the next as one eats the other. This diagram shows a typical ocean ecosystem. Down here you have the krill, okay? All right. It starts off even below that. Krill's not a producer. You've got to have a producer to start the food chain down here. All right. So what's down here is the algae. Okay. Starts off with the algae. That's our producer. They do photosynthesis, and that's what starts the food chain. So the krill eat the algae. All right. Oh, that is algae down there. Sorry, I had my face in front of it. So the krill eat the algae. The cod eats the krill. The leopard seal eats the cod, and the killer whale eats the leopard seal. But look at the way the energy is going. The energy is going upwards from each organism. Okay. Okay. The ecosystems are usually more than one food chain, though. Think about if you actually had these animals in the ocean. Does the krill only ever eat algae? Does the cod only ever eat krill? Cod doesn't eat just krill, okay? He might eat this herring one day, or he might eat this like zooplankton one day, okay? Does the leopard seal only eat cod? No. He might eat this penguin, or he might eat a squid. All right. So that's why food webs are better than food chains, because you don't always have the exact same thing for lunch every single day. All right. So what you can have then is each type of animal has more than one type of food. So there's more than one chain in an ecosystem. So the food web helps you show these feeding relationships, these other feeding relationships in an ecosystem. So the food web is a little bit more complex network of feeding chains. So you have feeding chains is a linear sequence. A food web is a more complex network. And again, you know this if we're just putting the words together for you. But all of these steps in the chain are called trophic levels. They're called feeding levels, trophic levels. Okay? Every step of energy through the food chain or food web is a trophic level. And so the trophic level is like steps in a chain or on levels on the pyramid. And these are our producers, and then primary, secondary, tertiary consumers. What's the word after tertiary? Tertiary means third. Do you remember the word for fourth? Quaternary. Like hear the word quarter, like 4 quarters in a dollar. Quaternary is your fourth level. And then there's 5 levels called quintenary, but it doesn't happen often. Quintenary. All right, but these are our trophic levels. All right, so we start with our plants, which are our producers. They produce energy from the sun and nutrients. Then you have the herbivores that eat the plants. Okay. These are our primary consumers right here. The herbivores are our primary consumers. All right. Then you have your first level carnivores. These are our secondary consumers. All right. The secondary consumers are going to eat the herbivores. And then this level here is going to be our tertiary consumers because they eat the secondaries. Okay. Every single time energy is transferred, though, some of the energy is lost as heat. Therefore, you get less energy available as you go up because some of that is lost as heat. And so, because the energy is lost as heat during cellular respiration, then organisms have to use much of that energy living and carrying out the functions of living. All right, so let me tell you what this means. Okay, so let's imagine we had a food chain a minute ago that I was talking about. You had a grass, and then crickets, and then bird, and then what ate the bird? A cat. Okay, so imagine this cricket. He eats this grass. Say he has as much grass in. Let me see. Where's the picture? As much grass in a week as in the layer of my hand. Okay, so this is how much grass he eats in a week. He's eating this grass, and he eats 100% of this grass in a week. But he uses most of the energy from this grass to jump around and sing his cricket songs and have a cricket girlfriend or whatever he's going to do. He uses most of that energy jumping around and stuff. Only 10% of the energy that he got from this grass does he actually make into cricket meat. Okay, so let me try that one more time. So my hand shows you this is 100% of the grass he eats in a week. So he eats this in a week. But most of the energy he gets from the grass, he spends jumping around, chirping, having cricket girlfriends, running from other things. He spends most of that energy jumping around. Only 10% of that energy does he use to actually make cricket meat. So when the bird eats him, does the bird get 100% of the energy? The bird only gets the 10% that he turned into meat. And so then the bird spends he has to eat a whole bunch of crickets, but then he spends most of his energy singing, making a nest, laying eggs, all right, And then when the cat eats them, does the cat get 100% of the bird's energy? Just the 10% that the bird turned into meat. And so this is what we have going on. This is why we have these numbers. Okay? Only 10% of the energy gets transferred up each level. The rest of the energy gets spent living life. So we use this energy pyramid to show us that there's a lot more energy on the bottom levels than there are higher up. Only 10% gets transferred as you go. Every layer in the energy pyramid represents one trophic level. And the producers form the base of the pyramid. This is where our plants would be. No, not the decomposers. Hang on. Right here. Let me see. The plants are at the bottom level. And remember, I said they usually don't put the decomposers on a pyramid because the decomposers can show up anywhere. Okay? So we start with the producers on the bottom. And so the producers form the base of the pyramid, which is the lowest trophic level, and it contains the most energy. Do you see this number right here? 100,000 whatevers of energy. Okay? Then herbivores get that, but they have less energy, but they make up the second level. So they only get 10%, so you just knock off a 0. Anytime you have numbers like this, guys, don't let them freak you out. You'll have to do some where you're trying to guess or trying to figure out how much energy goes up each level. Just drop a 0. It's levels of 10, okay? Just drop a 0. So the plants have 100,000 whatevers. The herbivores only get 10,000 whatevers. And the herbivores, remember, are called primary consumers because they're the first ones to eat. All right. Then the secondary consumers, okay, they only get 1,000 whatevers of energy. I think it's called kilojoules, okay, of energy. But we can just say whatevers of energy. Units of energy, whatever you want to call it. I think it's kilojoules, but you can just say units of energy. All right, the next level up. So if we have, this is our plant, okay, this is our grasshopper. He got 100,000. The bird only gets 10,000. The cat only gets 100. Remember, knock off another 0. And then the snake only gets 10. That's why there's so many fewer of these than there are of everything below. Okay? If you count how many of an ecosystem, well, that's on one of the next slides. I'll tell you about that in a second. So the herbivores contain less energy, and they make up the second level. The carnivores that are the next level feed on the herbivores, and they feed on other carnivores and make up the top levels. Organisms in the upper trophic levels, they get a lot less energy, okay, because the ones below them used it all up. And so the pyramid then is a great way to illustrate how this works because the pyramid becomes smaller at the top where there's less and less energy available. We call this the rule of 10. Remember, I said it was levels of 10. You just drop a 0. So that's my... I've got a pen. Yeah, I've got a pen. All right, so if the plants, here's an easy one. If the plants are getting 100% of the energy, okay, the crickets are only getting 10% of that. The bird only gets 1% of that. And then the cat gets 1/10 of what was available down here at the bottom. So about 90% of that energy is used up carrying out life's processes. Like I said, when the crickets are jumping around, when the birds are singing, all of that stuff. The remaining 10% of the energy becomes part of the organism's body as meat and muscles and organs and tissues, and it's stored in the molecules of the animal. This 10% is all that's available to the next level when one organism consumes and eats it up, the next one. The rest is released as heat. That other 90% is released as heat or life processes or songs, jumping around, whatever it is. You can't put your hands on it. It's gone. So if we're only sending 10% up each level, how does this affect the whole ecosystem? So the decreasing amounts of energy at the trophic levels affects the organization of the whole ecosystem. First, there's two parts. First, the energy loss is going to affect the number of organisms at each level. For example, zebras and other herbivores are going to outnumber the lions on the savanna by 1,000 to 1. Okay, there's way more zebras and wildebeests and gazelles and other herbivores, giraffes, all the herbivores. There's way more herbivores than there are lions on the savannah because it takes so much food. Okay, there's a lot of energy down here, but less energy as you go each level up. So you can't have as many lions as you have blades of grass. There's no way. The second part is that this energy loss limits the number of levels in an organism, in an ecosystem. So not only do you have fewer numbers, you're also going to have fewer levels. Okay, remember I said you can get to quaternary level, quaternary consumer only in some ecosystems. Most of the time you're going to get quaternary and sometimes only tertiary. Okay, so the ecosystems rarely have more than 4 or 5 trophic levels because the ecosystem doesn't have enough energy left to support these higher levels. For example, a lion typically needs about 250 square kilometers of land to hunt for food. And therefore, an animal that feeds on lion is going to need even way more food and energy to harvest that small amount of energy at the top of the level. So the organisms that do feed on lions, what feeds on a lion? What? Something eats a lion? Yeah. Little bitty small parasitic worms and fleas. Small fleas and stuff, because at that high up on the pyramid, there's almost no energy left for anybody else. So it has to be something small. Okay, something that only needs a tiny bit of energy, like ticks and fleas. You see this guy scratching, or this lady scratching? All right, so these are the main ideas of the things that we've learned so far. Okay, so the majority of the Earth's organisms depend on the sun for energy. Remember we said there were some at the bottom of the ocean that didn't, but the majority of them need the sun. The producers are going to harness that sun's energy directly by photosynthesis, and then the consumers are going to use the sun's energy indirectly by eating the producers or other consumers. The paths of the energy transferred can be followed using food chains or food webs and trophic level pyramids. And only about 10% of the energy that an organism eats is going to be stored and transferred when that thing is eaten. Only 10% gets turned into meat. The other 90% is lost. Okay, that's why the pyramids are smaller at top, and you have a lot fewer animals of that type at the apex predators. But I think that covers it, so I'll see you guys the next time.